All right, so you want to be an IAS officer, right?
Oh.
Well, we were talking green energy open access in India today, and there's a recent court case that could totally change how it works.
And this case is perfect for the UPSC. It touches on energy policy, environmental law, and how power is divided between the center and states. It's like a real-life case study for your public administration paper.
Okay, so open access means a consumer can buy electricity from someone other than their local provider.
Right, like choosing your own mobile network.
Gotcha. So we're talking green energy, open access, people opting for renewable sources. The central government made these new green energy open access rules, GEOA, in 2022 to make going green easier, but then the Karnataka High Court stepped in and basically said, not so fast.
Exactly. They struck down these GOA rules. The question is, who has the power to make these rules? The court looked at the Electricity Act of 2003, which is key for the Indian power sector.
And the UPSC loves to test your knowledge on that act, both in prelims and the mains. So what did the act say?
Well, two sections are really important here. Section 42(2) says state electricity regulatory commissions, like Karnataka's KERC, get to decide how open access works for distribution licensees in their state.
So each state has its own energy rules, and the State Regulatory Commission makes sure everyone follows them.
Yes. And Section 181 says state commissions can make their own regulations as long as they agree with the Electricity Act, so they have some freedom.
So states have a clear role here. What was the central government's argument for creating these GEOA rules?
They said they had the power based on the Electricity Act and that they needed to fulfill India's international climate commitments.
So they were trying to do the right thing for the environment.
Yes, but the court said the Electricity Act is clear about who's in charge here, and it's the states. They basically reminded the central government that they can't just ignore the law.
So the states won this round? This is important for the UPSC understanding the balance of power between the center and the states, especially in a sector as important as energy.
Absolutely. This shows how these tensions play out in real life, and the UPSC wants you to be able to analyze that.
Okay, so now I'm curious about what these GEOA rules actually said. Why did the center want to implement them?
They were designed to make it easier and cheaper for people to get green energy. The goal was to encourage more renewable energy and help India meet its climate goals.
So what were some of the key things about these rules? What made them special?
One big change was that they lowered how much energy you needed to use to participate in open access and buy green power. Before, it was 1 megawatt, which is a ton of electricity.
Way more than a normal house uses. So these rules made it possible for smaller consumers to get involved.
Exactly. They lowered the limit to 100 kilowatts, which is much less. That opened it up to businesses and communities who wanted to go green.
I see. What else did these GEOA rules do?
They also made distribution companies, discoms, offer green power if a consumer asked for it. Before, they didn't really have to prioritize renewables.
So I made the discoms offer more green options.
Yes. They also had some cool incentives for people who switched to green energy. They introduced green certificates, which are like a reward for using renewable energy.
Like a badge of honor for being green. That's awesome. Were there any other benefits?
Yes. The rules also had financial benefits, like removing some charges that used to be added to open access consumers. It was all about making green energy more attractive.
So these GEOA rules were pretty significant. They could have really changed the Indian power sector and helped it transition to renewables.
Exactly. And understanding these rules and all the legal stuff is crucial for the UPSC. It shows how policy law and governance work together in the real world.
Okay, so we talked about the legal battle, the GEOA rules themselves, and why they were important. Now, what does this court ruling mean for India's green energy goals? Are they finished? We'll get into that after a quick word from our sponsors. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this is helping you prep for the UPSC. We're here to help you ace those exams.
We'll be back in a flash to answer that question and more.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about those GEOA rules and how the Karnataka High Court basically said no to them. Classic center versus state stuff, right?
Yeah.
And the UPSC loves those kinds of questions.
For sure. This case makes you think, what happens now to India's goals for green energy? Did the court just kill open access?
But I'm wondering, is this bad news for renewable energy in India?
Not necessarily. This ruling doesn't mean green energy open access is over. It just shows how complicated it is to manage the power sector in India. It's like a puzzle with a lot of pieces.
So it's more of a roadblock than a stop sign.
Exactly. It's a reminder that there are lots of players involved. The center, the states, the courts, and people like us, the consumers. And they all have different goals and powers.
So what does this mean for how India switches to different energy sources? Do we have to start over from scratch?
Not really. The court is saying that the center and the states have to work together. They can't just do their own thing.
So it's about finding a balance between what the country wants and what each state can do.
Yes. And the court is also saying that everyone has to follow the rules of the game, which is the Electricity Act of 2003. They make sure nobody goes too far, and that's important for keeping things fair.
Good point. And something UPSC folks should remember, the courts have a lot of power in India, and they can really affect policy decisions.
Absolutely. A perfect example. So, since we're talking about the Indian power sector, let's look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, I don't know that much about the overall situation. What's going on there?
Well, it's huge. India is the third largest producer and consumer of electricity in the whole world. As of April 2024, India had 442.85 gigawatts of installed power capacity.
Wow, that's a ton of power. But I bet a lot of that still comes from fossil fuels, right?
You're right, coal is still a big part of it, but India is really trying to use more renewables, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. Energy projects are a big part of India's infrastructure plans. 24% of the Rs. 111 lakh crore pipeline, to be exact.
So they're serious about this new energy infrastructure. What about making things more efficient? I heard India loses a lot of energy during transmission and distribution.
It's true, that's a problem, but they're working on it. For example, they have the Revamped Distribution Sector Scheme, RDSS, which wants to lower those losses to 12–15% by 2024–25. They want the whole system to work better.
So a lot is happening there. The UPSC also likes to ask about different committees involved in policymaking. Are there any for power sector reforms that we should know?
Oh yeah, there are a few big ones. The Kirit Committee gave their recommendations in 2022. They wanted to change how petroleum and natural gas are priced, which is really important for making electricity.
So knowing about fuel pricing is key. What other committees are important?
There's the Ashok Chawla Committee from 2011. They looked at how resources are used for power generation, especially coal and natural gas. And then we have the Deepak Parekh Committee from 2008. They focused on financing power sector projects.
So there have been a lot of smart people working on how to improve the Indian power sector. But let's go back to India's promises to the world, like the ones they made at COP26. This court case shows how hard it is to make those promises happen, right?
Totally. It's a reminder that good intentions aren't enough. You have to figure out the legal and regulatory details.
So remind us, what were those big goals India announced at COP26?
Okay, at COP26 in Glasgow, India said they would be net zero emissions by 2070. They also announced Panchamitra, a 5-part plan to fight climate change. It has some really ambitious goals.
Okay, break it down for us. What's in this Panchamitra plan?
First, they want to have 500 gigawatts of non-fossil energy capacity by 2030. That's a big increase from now.
Right.
And they want 50% of their energy to come from renewables by that year, too.
That's a huge change toward cleaner energy. What else?
They also said they would cut their carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030. That's a lot. And finally, they want to reduce the economy's carbon intensity by 45% from what it was in 2005.
Those are some big goals. And this court case shows us it's not enough to just set goals. You have to figure out how to actually achieve them within the law.
Exactly. And that brings us back to why it's so important to understand the roles of different parts of the government, a favorite topic for the UPSC.
Right. It's all connected. Policy, law, and how things are governed all shape India's energy future. Now, we're going to take a quick break, but stay with us because when we come back, we'll wrap up with some key takeaways for our UPSC folks and a question to think about.
Stay tuned.
And we're back, wrapping up our deep dive into green energy open access in India. We've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, from legal challenges to policy details to India's big goals on the world stage.
It's been a real look into how energy is governed in India, something our UPSC folks should definitely be paying attention to.
Absolutely. Knowing the Electricity Act of 2003, the different regulators, and how the center and states interact is super important for the exam.
Okay, so big picture. What are the key takeaways for our future civil servants? What can they learn from this whole GEOA situation?
Well, first off, this case shows how important it is to understand how power is divided in India's federal system.
Right.
It's not always easy. There can be tension between the different levels of government.
Right. It's not just about knowing the policies. It's about knowing who gets to make them and enforce them.
Exactly. This case also shows that the courts play a big role in making sure everyone follows the law, even when it comes to complicated stuff like energy policy.
Like they're saying, hey, you can't do that.
Exactly. For those prepping for the UPSC, this means you have to understand not just what the laws say, like the Electricity Act, but how they actually work in real life.
So it's about seeing the bigger picture, how policy, law, and governance all fit together.
Right. And this whole thing reminds us that even with the best intentions, reaching big goals like switching to cleaner energy needs careful planning, coordination, and really understanding the laws and regulations we have.
It's not just about setting goals. You have to know how to get there.
Now, before we finish, I have a question for all you smart people studying for the UPSC.
Imagine you're the one making decisions about India's energy future. How would you balance the need for more renewable energy with all the legal stuff and the different roles of the government?
That's a great question. And there's no easy answer. You need to really understand the challenges, be ready to work together to find solutions, and be committed to doing what's best for India.
Well said. That's a challenge for the best minds in India. So to everyone out there, keep thinking about that question. It could be the key to doing well on the exam, and even more important, to creating a better future for India.
That's right. And that's the end of our deep dive. We hope you found it helpful and maybe even got you interested in learning more about energy policy.
If you enjoyed this episode and it helped you with your UPSC prep, please subscribe and share it with your friends. We're here to help you succeed.
Until next time, keep learning, keep aiming high, and keep that passion for public service burning bright.